Hello, everyone. Give me 1 second. All right. Welcome, everyone, to today's HLA webinar, The Psychology of Hearing Loss. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amanda Watson, and I'm your meeting planner for HLAA and the host for today's meeting. The webinar is sponsored by Oticon, and we will show a quick video for Oticon at the end of the webinar. Today's presentation will be recorded and is currently being recorded and will be available for playback at a later time on the HLA website at hearingloss.org. Don, next slide, please. I need to give you some technical tips to get started. Don, can you go to the next slide, please?
Okay, there we go.
Thank you. To see captions on this webinar, you will need to click the CC icon and click on Show Subtitle. Next slide, please. You can change the font size in subtitle settings. Next slide, please. Chat is available for technical issues and panelists only. We would like participants to please use the Q&A icon to ask questions. We will be using this to facilitate questions and answers after the presentation. Next slide, please. If you've joined by computer, the presentation should be in side-by-side mode. Slides are on the left and panelists are on the right in gallery view. You can change the size of your side-by-side view by hovering between the two screens and moving the gray bar to adjust to your desired size. If you've joined by mobile device or phone, your view may be different, and you may have to scroll between views to the desired one. Our presenter today is Don Doherty. Don is a retired Marine Corps combat veteran who lost his hearing in Vietnam. He's worn hearing aids since June 1970, and he received a cochlear implant in 2020, and he's retired from the Department of Veteran Affairs, and he retired in 2016 after 25 years of service. And Don is very actively involved with HLAA and has been a member for over 25 years. Don, I will now turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank everybody for coming today, and I want to especially thank HLAA for continuing our education during this time of the pandemic. And certainly I want to thank our sponsor, Oticon, for sponsoring this webinar. Well, as you've heard, I'm a Marine combat veteran, and I lost my hearing in 1966 due to exposure to high noise and the environment that I was in. I didn't get my hearing aids right away. I tried to continue with my Marine Corps career, and I was stationed in Puerto Rico. And because I was an infantryman, we had to practice our skills. And so what I did is during a night patrol, I really couldn't understand the whispers. And so the gig was up. Everybody realized I didn't have a hearing loss, and I ended up getting medically evacuated to a Navy hospital at that time in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. While there, I went to oral rehabilitation training, which the military had in those days. It was speech reading, psychology of hearing loss, interacting in small groups, going outside and testing the hearing aids. And that was how we adapted to the hearing loss. And I was very fortunate because the military doesn't do that today. There was an excellent model, but they let it go to the Veterans Administration, and not all VAs have oral rehab or the time to do it. And so what I thank HLAA for is really giving me a sense of identity, who I am, what I am, and acceptance of my hearing loss. I always thought after Vietnam that hearing loss was one-dimensional. And what that meant to me was all I had to do was increase the volume. If I increased the volume, my troubles would be over. But I had a problem. I couldn't get up very easily with a clock radio or with a alarm clock, even with somebody pounding on the door. So I tried to get the best and biggest alarm clock that I could. It was like a boombox. And I set it up to 80 or 90 decibels. And I was able to wake up, not a problem. But unfortunately, I had to scrape my wife off the ceiling every time that we got up in the morning. And so it was a no-win. Either sleep in separate bedrooms or find a different way to wake up. I learned very early on that hearing loss is multi-dimensional. One of my passions after I had my hearing aid was to try to learn as much as I could about hearing loss, about what happens with hearing loss, the biology, the physiology. And when I started my community college days way back in 1970 or so, I realized that there's a lot of information out there and that this single dimension approach that I had to hearing loss wasn't true. What I learned was that there were very large areas of differentiation with hearing loss, depending on where you look, what books you're looking at, whether it be medical, whether it be psychological, biology, sociology, and whatnot. And most of the models today incorporate a biopsychosocial model. This is our physical processes, our mental and behavior, and communication and social. In biology, we talk about the cochlea and how the sound goes into the ear, travels through the air, then when it hits the semicircular canals, it goes through fluid, and finally, when a neurotransmitter is activated, what happens is it sends a signal to the auditory nerve, and that's how we understand. The cognitive abilities, how we speak language, they're all affected by our biology. And we don't have a lot of control over that, but we do have the ability to wear hearing aids or other assistive devices to make it easier. We can even identify the degree and type of hearing loss simply by the audiogram. Some of the psychological aspects of hearing aids, it primarily deals with mind and behaviors. It's how we cope with the world. You all know individuals that don't cope well with their hearing loss, and they may be depressed, they may get angry, they may be upset, but their emotions are very much involved. And it affects who they see themselves as. You can either see yourself as a person with skills who can make contributions, or you identify with the hearing loss and see yourself as less than, not understanding that your unique experience in interacting with the world is just yours, because no one else has the same experiences, background, biology, and psychology that you do. Some of the social aspects deal with relationships and how we deal with other people. A lot of times, even today, we'll look at for individuals that have similarities, and we'll look at the people that have differences. And especially with hearing loss, it's very comfortable going to an HLAA convention, even if it's virtual, because you can recognize similarities, you can identify with the people who are there, and all the technology is there to help you understand what's going on and how you relate. Hearing loss is primarily a deficit in communication. The signals that we receive don't always match what's being said. And this affects individuals, particularly in group settings or when there's a lot of loud background noise or a loud restaurant, or even in a committee room or a lunch counter or something like that. And individuals that have hearing loss, they tend to gravitate to those areas they feel most comfortable. And this could be one-on-one. This could be unknowingly in quieter parts of the building where there's less background noise and you can see the person that you're talking with. Invariably, people with a hearing loss tend to avoid loud group situations simply because they don't feel comfortable and their ability to discriminate what's being said is affected. And then there's other situations I call idiosyncratic, because the experience of hearing loss, because it's different for everybody, there's different aspects that you may not realize, you may not know about. That's the value of going to an HLAA chapter meeting. You can get the reports of other people that have the same loss that you might have, but they have different experiences. They have a different narrative. It's also different because of the type of loss you might have. My loss when I first left Vietnam was high frequency neurosensory neural hearing loss. That means I couldn't hear those high frequency sounds. I could hear the noise. I could hear low frequency pretty good, but I couldn't hear the high. I couldn't discriminate with high sounds. It's also affected by the age. If you're a very young child, hearing loss can affect language. It can affect your personality. It can affect how you see yourself as a person. It can affect who you trust, who you don't trust. So there's a lot of factors that go into personality, even as a young person. If you can't discriminate, if you feel differently, and you have difficult time dealing with your peer group, that's an aspect that your parents and other people that are important in your life need to understand. In children, before they can communicate very well, it's almost like a hyperactive child or attention deficit disorder. There may be behavioral problems, and it may show its form in aggression, hyperactivity, and they may hide other problems such as depression, anxiety, and in particularly learning difficulties. Sometimes the teacher doesn't realize they're not being understood. They don't always understand that individuals have different capacities to discriminate, and it makes it difficult to be successful in the schoolroom. Luckily, in today's world, teachers are giving a lot more information about hearing loss and some of the solutions involving hearing assistive technologies. But in general, it's better to set limits, speak simply, give one instruction at a time, and do it in an environment that's not distracting, where there's a lot of noise, like a restaurant or something like that. It makes it a lot easier for the child to follow through and work with their parents. The biggest factor in child development is the family. This is the group that nurtures that child with hearing loss, that helps them to understand, to learn, to see who they are, and hopefully give them a lot of positive reinforcement for what they can do right. And sometimes it appears not in the family, but other people in the community. Support from other people, aunts, uncles, the community, might be a neighbor or a friend, and even a sports coach. I can remember when I played football that my coach had a tremendous impact on who I was. And even though my parents were loving and cared for me a great deal, I was always able to sit down with coach and he would answer my questions and help me to deal with the adolescents that I was struggling with. The individual child during this time of development is really dealing a lot with temperament, how they deal with frustration, how they deal with their anxiety. What are the building blocks to the personality? Are they positive? Are they negative? Is it difficult? Is it easy? How do you put it all together before that child gets to adolescence? In adolescence, they have to discover who they are as a person, their identity formation, and how they relate to their peer group. So the family has a huge impact on how well or not so well the child may deal with the hearing loss that they have. Another big thing is language development. When you hear a sound through your ear, it goes through the air, fluid, and electrical energy to the auditory nerve. And sometimes with hearing loss, bits and pieces of words are missing. It might be the beginning, it might be the end, it might be high frequency, or it might be less commonly a low frequency. And these bits and pieces of words are how we understand language at that time. Even for myself, when my hearing loss occurred and I went back to college and I had sometimes difficulty pronouncing certain words, and I had to double check and look to see that when I said that word, it was close to proximity of what I was hearing. Because when discrimination is lessened, you get frustrated. And I'm sure each of you in your own way has gotten frustrated when you couldn't understand what was being said. I can remember after I came back, when I listened to music, I couldn't understand all the words anymore. I couldn't understand the instructions if they weren't, communicated right in front of me, where I could read lips or find other cognitive clues to help me out. The frustration comes from this desire to fully express yourself in the right way, because it can be embarrassing if you jump into a conversation and say something completely off topic because you heard it wrong. That's why I say if you've got a hearing loss, you've got a built-in sense of humor, because some of these instances are really, really funny. The ability to communicate really affects who you are and how you see yourself as a positive, giving, loving human being, somebody special, somebody unique. Or if you have not had good experiences with your hearing loss, you may identify with feeling different, feeling unusual, not being a part of your peer group, which would tend to have you avoid those types of situations. Hearing loss for a peer is the same as being different. And for children, especially when they first go to school or they're trying to associate with their playmates, nobody wants to be seen as different. It could be being overweight, it could be wearing glasses, it could be having a speech impediment, it could be not having the right household to buy the latest clothing or the clothes you would like to wear that other people may be wearing. And so this identification with being different can lead to difficult experiences from your peers. I can remember when my daughter was in very young school and she went out from one school system in Virginia. We went to Plano, Texas, and she started school there. And she had a Southern accent. The clothing styles were a little bit different. And she got teased for coming to the new school. She was new, she didn't know everybody, and it was difficult to have her be accepted by a group in a way that she would fit in. It took her several months to adapt to that situation. Luckily, her teachers were sensitive to that. I was sensitive to that. And we helped teach her some of her strengths and weaknesses by pursuing tasks she liked to do, like coloring, studying, getting good marks on tests, doing these different things. You always want to try to find a way to express a positive note to that child. I call it catching doing something right. Don't always correct them for doing something wrong. It says, I know you drew out the lines, but look at how wonderful these colors look. Give it away where you can give the person as much the feedback as you can, because it starts building self-esteem and it starts giving them the capacity to deal with other situations. Some of the developmental challenges that the child going up to adolescence will go through are very telling. And I've got a few of them here that I'd like to talk about. One of them that if you take psychology or sociology classes is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And basically what he talks about is before you can get to that level of belonging, being loved, and self-esteem, your basic needs have to be satisfied. You have to have enough food, you have to have enough water, you have to have a safe environment when you go home. You have to feel safe in your environment. And unfortunately, some children today, they don't always have that. I've read stories of children going to school hungry. I've read that the school meal is sometimes the best meal they've had all day, because unfortunately, even today, it's very difficult for some families to make it, especially if you're coming from another country. If you're coming to this country for the first time, and you don't have a type of job that can provide the salary that you need to be successful. Maslow believes that once these needs are being met, where the child can feel belonged and loved in his family, then the building blocks to the person's self-esteem can take place and they can grow. Self-actualization was almost the tip of the pyramid. And Maslow believed not everybody gets there, but that's okay. It's the journey. It's not always the end result. Erik Erikson did a lot of work on the stages of life, starting in the beginning where the person had no life at all in the womb. They didn't have a sense of self. They're just a baby. They're absorbing all this light and darkness. As they grow, they start having this emerging self-awareness. They say, oh, I've got feet. Oh, this is my hand. That's my mom. That's my dad. These factual self-concepts start coming into play. And sometimes the self-concept is overinflated. They become very self-centered, and which needs to be corrected. But mainly they're looking at comparisons. They're comparing themselves to other people, particularly 12, 13, 14 years of age. There's a lot of impact of peer pressure. Think back to some things that you really didn't want to do, but you did anyway because your peer group, your friends who advocated, try this, try that, it's okay, we're all doing it. And we've all gone through that. And all of these different things combined determine who you are as an individual in your life, your self-identity, if you will. And that's how Erik Erikson had his theories develop. Another one that I like a lot is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was the author of a book called Death and Dying. And I read that during a grief course I took one time. And what I liked about it, she talked about loss and grieving if someone died. But you can also apply the same principles to any loss. Loss of your friends, loss of family, loss of your hometown, loss of your brother or sister who's going off to college, loss of hearing. Did you ever grieve your loss of hearing? Did you ever think about what that's like now, that how much your life is going to be different? So this model of grief I can use on a lot of different topics when I'm talking about loss. What have you lost? What has your child lost? Have they lost friendships? Have they lost acceptance? Have they lost the ability to advocate for themselves because of the hearing loss, because they couldn't discriminate? And Kubler-Ross talked about 5 different phases that I think pertain very well to hearing loss. The first one is denial. How long has it been from the time you first realized that you had a hearing loss till you did something about it? In many cases, it could be up to 3 years, sometimes longer, because of denial. Says, I may say, I don't need hearing aids. I can hear you just fine. When it's one-on-one and you're looking at each other, that might be true. But denial seems to be the first of these stages that individuals go through. Then you can be angry, and it's okay to be angry. Why do I have to have this hearing loss? It's not fair. I shouldn't have to deal with this. Why am I so tired after every day just trying to hear? So anger comes out. There might be some bargaining involved. I can remember when I went to my first duty station after I was going through oral rehabilitation and left the hospital. I went to a Marine barracks, and in those days, you had to have your hair very, very short, and it was very obvious that you were wearing a hearing aid. And, that kind of bargaining, I had to make deals even with my wife. I said, listen, I'm going to wear them when I go to work, but it's so draining. How about if I don't wear the hearing aids when I'm home and it's just you? Very selfish, but it took me a while to deal with that. Then we talk about depression, how it feels when you look back on it. And finally, you get to a part where you're in acceptance. You can accept the fact that you have a hearing loss. And today, that's very much where I'm at. I can accept the fact. I know even with a cochlear implant, it's very obvious. In fact, with my cochlear implant, I have different types of stickers I can put on my rondo. One's a pirate hat. Others are very bright, so that people can see that I have a hearing loss. And that helps sometimes when I'm asking a person to look at me when they're speaking, or to go into a quieter part of the room that I'm in. Excuse me. There's another gentleman named Gotsky who dealt with education and learning theory. And he said he liked the scaffolding approach, which means you build on one thing, then you do the next skill, then the next skill, the next skill. And that works with hearing loss too, because you have to be comfortable in a variety of environments. You can't just wear your hearing aids at home or just at work or just at school. You have to be able to discriminate in various sounds, different situations, different people, different accents. I remember when I first got my cochlear implant, they gave a test with several people talking, male, female, and different accents. In the beginning, I had a dickens of a time dealing with that, but as I practiced and as I worked with my cochlear implant, I was able to get better and better discrimination. And so even though my discrimination is not there completely yet, I can understand a lot better than I did with just the hearing aids. Another theory you have is proximal development. And this is basically like Montessori, do what the child is interested in and can do. And that's very helpful for their positive self-esteem. I would also say that with a deaf or hard of hearing child, it's not always easy to understand where that might be or how that might be. You may not be unclear unless a teacher or a doctor or hearing test picks it up. You may be unaware over time. Your parents may say, well, he's just not paying attention. Or it's just selective listening. He can hear what he wants to. Different ways like that delay the learning experience and make it more difficult to hire with that. Okay, another gentleman we're going to talk about is Seligman. He deals with the positive psychology theory of idea of learned helplessness. And I was really infatuated with this when I was in school, because one of the examples that they showed was a person who had a small tennis court, maybe the size 16 inches across, maybe 12 inches up and down, with a net over it. And during the experiment, they put a shock mechanism right under the floor of the box, and that went into a battery and to a push button, where you could push a button that would administer a shock to that half of the box, and the animal would jump over the net to get away from the shock and land on the other side. What was fascinating for me was, as these shocks occurred one after another, sometimes the experimenter, for the experiment, would put a shock on both sides of the net, and the animal would jump back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until suddenly it just stopped jumping. The animal knew that it was going to get a shock no matter which way they went. And so they gave up. They gave up trying to get away. And this is the concept of learned helplessness. If all the child hears is criticism, if they're not accepted by their peer group, if they're not accepted by their schoolmates, by the teachers, by their relatives, sometimes even by the parents themselves, it makes it very difficult to give that person the motivation they need to take action on their own. Another idea from learned helplessness is the elephants on a chain story. And this resembles many people's stories who remain chained to bad past experiences. Think of a person who got a hearing aid for the first time, and the noises were very loud. The perception was that they couldn't stand all that amplification. And so after a couple of tries, sometimes Even if the hearing aid costs $2,000 or $3,000, they take the hearing aids off and they put them in a desk drawer and they don't use them anymore. These experiences, particularly in the beginning, can cause a person not to try again because they're holding on to the negative experience which held them back. Whether it be a negative experience with people, a negative experience with the device they're using. My recommendation is go back to the audiologist, go back to your mentor or your counselor and let them know what the problem is and why it's difficult for you to make these changes. Believe me, nobody's too old to make changes. But the goal is to lay a positive foundation, even if it's incremental. You have to be able to have this positive foundation in order to have an optimistic approach. If you don't have that positive foundation, you're going to be very pessimistic, not only about hearing loss, but about who you are. Because sometimes the worst critic in the world is yourself. I know for many tests that I took in college or even beyond, I always was my own worst critic. I could always write better. I could always speak better. I could always do something a little bit better. But the key is to believe in yourself. And the key is to have other people believe in you. My coach believed in me. My parents believed in me. And it's all the difference in the world when you're trying to make changes, life changes. Okay, come on here. Okay, Strakowski, he's another positive psychology and hearing loss person. And he equated the parents' level of acceptance with positive response. In other words, it's not just you that have to deal with the loss of hearing. Think what it must be as a parent to go through that. It's very difficult. It's tiring. You have to do a lot of extra attention. And if you've got 3 or 4 or 5 other brothers and sisters, it's not always easy to find the time and the environment to put these into play. So parents can get frustrated as well. Just differences in the ability to see the positive is really a strong issue, particularly with difficulties in communication. If a person has a speech impediment, they're not pronouncing the words correctly, they're avoiding peer contact, they're avoiding contact with groups. All this can affect communication because the individual doesn't go out in the environment, is not outside playing, is not playing sports because of the noise of the basketball or whatnot. Even with a hearing aid, it's different. I can remember in Philadelphia, which was my first duty station, we had something called evening parade. An evening parade might involve 200 or 300 people in 4 or 5 platoons with a band and everything. And you had to go through these various commands and actions at the command of one person who may be 60 or 70 yards away. The most difficult thing for me was the sound of the wind blowing past my hearing aid or the sound of a jet going overhead because we were only about 4 or 5 miles from Philadelphia International Airport. So these difficulties made it difficult for me to communicate. I had to do it visually and memorize pretty much each of the steps that the evening event had to go on. Fostering and focusing on the positive behaviors of the child can help your child see the progress being made. And that's very, very important. More importantly, it allows you to lay a positive foundation. Oh, am I going here? Sorry about that. It allows you to set priorities and change your goals to help this person have a social circle of support, because there's going to be milestones. You know, the first words you remember, the first time they said mom or dad, the first time they got an A on a report card, the first time they were able to read a book and understand. All these milestones can be a little bit more difficult with someone with hearing loss, particularly a child or adolescent, but it can be done. And also, it helps that you have a circle of support. As a parent working with someone with hearing loss, there's no respite care. There's no 3-week vacation that you can take because you're working with that person all the time. So I encourage you to do everything you can to keep that environment as positive as possible. I'd like to talk a little bit about veteran hearing loss because it's a major issue. Roughly a third of the individuals coming off active duty have a hearing loss. And about a third, once they hit 65, have about hearing loss. And you put it together, it keeps increasing incrementally as you age, because as you age, sometimes your discrimination, your body ages with you, and it can be difficult. In Afghanistan and Iraq, the biggest injuries are IED, improvised explosive devices. They are blast injuries. They take limbs, sometimes result in traumatic brain injury. And when the veteran goes to a hospital, they're going to treat the most serious first. I know veterans that had traumatic brain injury. When we went to the hospital, the hearing loss wasn't addressed at all because they were trying to fix the brain to stop the swelling, to help the person deal with an amputation or something like that. But all veterans, especially as they get older, depend on the VA in some way. And right now, today, the top 2 disabilities rated by the Veterans Administration are hearing loss and tinnitus. Tinnitus is the hearing of sounds when it's coming internally, and it's not coming from something in your environment. And it can be debilitating if you can't turn the sound off. Today, there's something called masking, where you match the frequency with another sound to neutralize it. And they're also looking at different medications that can help that. We talked about age, 45% over 65 with a hearing loss. And the most difficult type of loss is what we call high frequency. And this is when your audiogram, it goes up a little bit and then has a very deep drop on the right-hand side. And this is typically your high frequency sounds. Your speech banana is about 40 or 50 decibels right in the middle of the audiogram. And the speech banana is where you get most of your vowels. As you get further beyond the vowel sounds, it takes on a higher frequency with your consonants. And these consonants, if you have a high frequency loss, you don't hear those high sounds. So what you're hearing is portions of a word, and you identify those portions of a word with your reality. So when you're understanding speech, you're understanding speech as your brain understands it, not as it's being pronounced if you didn't have a hearing loss. The major treatment for hearing loss today is hearing aids and cochlear implants. We don't have the ability to transplant or regrow a cochlear implant. And so what they have done is constantly make improvements to the hearing aids that we get. It could be FM systems, could be a bone anchored hearing aid, it could be maskers or sound generators, where you can program an aid to emphasize areas where you're having the loss and decrease the area where you would pick up noise. They're making marvelous discoveries every day. And I know even today, we're seeing more and more people have cochlear implants than we ever did. And I know the reason for that is because they work and they really help individuals to hear better. So technology marches on, and hopefully someday they'll be able to restore that portion of the cochlea that's damaged. Other stressors we talked about: limb loss from an IED, paralysis from spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injuries. PTSD is a major issue. Um, It's in a combat area, you see some things you probably would never see anywhere else. And sometimes it can have an effect on you for a little bit of time. And sometimes people can't let it go at all. Um, when I came back from Vietnam, I dealt with it pretty good. The only signs that I had from being around traumatic stressors was I would bite my nails and grind my teeth. Well, today I've got a full set of titanium blades under my implanted teeth to show you how that went. I don't have an issue today with PTSD, and I owe that to the support that I received from the veteran community and the support I've received from HLAA in dealing with it. A big issue we're dealing with today is depression, especially for families. Veteran suicide is at all times high for all of the services, but particularly for the ground forces that have been on the go in Afghanistan and in Iraq. As the war winds down, hopefully we'll be able to focus more on dealing with these stressors. Veterans deal daily with trauma, with grief, and with loss. There was an expression in Vietnam when something happened or somebody got killed, they would say it don't mean nothing. You say it just don't mean nothing. Tomorrow's another day, one more day down, one day closer to leaving. And that's very stressful, not only on the veteran, but also on their family, because there's a lot of losses that take place when individuals come back from the war zone or even leave military after retirement. One of the big ones is the transition to civilian life. I went over to Hawaii, the Philippines, Okinawa, Vietnam by ship. It took a long time. But now, when they came back, they flew me back to Norton Air Force Base. And that transition of leaving that base to go home after 2.5 years from being in the United States, I found it very challenging, particularly when there were protesters at the gate with signs and yelling as we left the base to go to the airport to get our planes. Some people lose that military culture. For whatever reason, military culture has a sense of pride. I think every veteran who has gone through boot camp has a sense of pride about them. I know every Marine who went through boot camp was a Marine forever. And these are the types of relationships, the cultures are valuable to the veteran after they leave the service. Because it's all about how the veteran sees who they are. How do they see their identity now that they're a civilian? Do they have purpose? Do they have self-worth? Are they ready to compete with other individuals in the job market? Are they able to relate to a different vocabulary that we use in the military? How about the acronyms in the civilian world? We say Zoom, we say FaceTime. Somebody, now I guess they all know that, but when I came out, we didn't have all these devices to communicate with. We certainly didn't have captioning. So it was a very different sense of, with the older veteran, having to deal with this. It deals with a reassessment of life goals and ambitions. Who do you want to be now? You've got one career in the military and you have another career. Well, I tried 3 or 4 different jobs. Being an administrator, I was a second manager at a homeless shelter. I worked for a marketing company. I worked for a company that dealt with file sharing and protection. And all of these ended up as a failure. Most of those companies went out of business. And they went out of business because they didn't have enough financial strength to survive. Just like today with this pandemic, the biggest people that are suffering are the small business owners. And be particularly empathic when you see and you work with them. The point being, reself, start over. Who are you after your hearing loss? It might be different than who you are when you're in the military. Some of the psychological effects of traumatic experiences that can inhibit personal and professional growth. survivor guilt, being on the same patrol, the guy in front of you gets killed, you survive. Somebody can say, well, if I was on the point, that wouldn't have happened. Dealing with PTSD coming back. And certainly I've seen substance abuse occur with returning veterans. And sometimes it can be very destructive, to the family. There could be physical handicaps in addition to hearing loss, or if you've lost part of your cognitive abilities, with traumatic brain injury, or you've lost a limb, or you have a partial paralysis. All of these things affect who you are. Luckily, I stayed in the Marine Corps, even with my hearing aid and my hearing loss. And I think because of that, because I was able to talk to other individuals who were in Vietnam, who were going through the same challenges, the same experiences, that was my peer group. And it really helped me to relate to what I was doing at the time. And in particular, to pursue my education. Helped me to get every degree that I could while I was in the service. And as it was, I ended up leaving with a master's degree. And so, I wouldn't have done that unless I had been challenged by other individuals who believed that I could do it, who believed that I had the wherewithal to be successful, even with a hearing aid. Some of the skills anyone needs to thrive with hearing loss is number one, advocacy skills. You need to stand up for yourself. If you don't hear someone or you don't understand, you got to be able to raise your hand and say, I'm sorry, but I didn't understand. Could you rephrase that? Could you face me when you're talking? Could you be in the light so I can see you speaking and read lips? Sometimes when I was out to dinner, the cash register wouldn't look at me. And so they were looking down at the money, ready to count change. And they would look down the whole while. I would give them my credit card, or I would give them a bill, but I wouldn't let go of it. And the person would try to take it, but I would still have it in my hand. What did they do? They looked up, then I said, thank you, and I released the bill. Some of those little tricks help individuals to learn that if you have an hearing loss, look at me, look at my face. Don't be in a crowded environment. Don't be in a noisy environment. You're a teacher every day of your life when you have a hearing loss. You're not only educating yourself, you're educating others because of your advocacy. I think you have to understand your support system. If you don't have a support system, where can you go? If you're in the service, you can join various military groups like the Veterans of Foreign War, Marine Corps League, Navy League, Air Force Association, Army associations, Coast Guard, whatever it is, there are groups meeting out there, and you can participate and you can continue to share with your military experiences. I think you have to understand development, particularly you have to understand what happened since you first got your hearing loss, whether you were in the beginning and you're an adult when you lost your hearing, or if you lost it as a child. There's different skill sets that you can work on to help yourself to communicate more effectively. One of the reasons that I like the convention so much is at the convention, you have the whole auditorium filled with individuals that are showing their products to help deal with hearing loss. I call them these hearing assistive technologies. And there's people there that can answer your questions. You can try the device out. You can talk to different people about your loss, about what works, what doesn't work. And I'd be so glad when we finish our virtual conventions and get back to meeting in person again. If you have the opportunity to do a webinar on hearing assistive technology, do so. Look at some of the devices that are out there. One of my most famous when I was on the road that I discovered back when HLAA was something called SSH, Self-Help for the Hard of Hearing. They showed me sometime, I told them I was going on the road a lot with my job, and I couldn't wake up very easily in a hotel room. The alarms weren't loud enough. The clock radio wasn't loud enough. Even if you beat on the door, that wasn't loud enough. So I said, what can I do? Well, that first meeting that I went to was SHHH, the beginning of HLAA, was why don't you get a vibrating alarm clock? And I said, what? A vibrating alarm clock? In all my years, military surveying, I had never heard of that. So I went to my first Harris catalog, looked up the types of vibrating alarm clocks, and to this day, I use a vibrating alarm clock to get up, not only when I'm traveling, but I also have one under my bed that vibrates and my light blinks when it's time to get up. Says a lot of wear and tear to the person you're living with. So here in assistive technology, it should be really big on your list of education. Flexibility of roles and expectations. Don't be rigid. I mean, you can have days that are great. You can have days that aren't so great. You can have great days where you embarrass yourself, but you got to learn to laugh at somebody's situation. Certainly, if you share that in a meeting of a chapter meeting, somebody's going to laugh with you because they've all gone through that. In the Marine Corps, we had an expression I call Semper Gumby. Semper Gumby, it used to be a little small, flexible doll. It was all green, and you could bend it and do certain things with it. And what the expression meant was that you have to be Semper Fidelis is always faithful in the Marine Corps lexicon. But Semper Gumby meant you always need to be flexible. Flexible, hurry up and wait, doing this, doing that. It's important that your expectations be kept where they're workable, and you do your best so you can, and that's all right. Appreciation. Get appreciation whenever you can get it. You know, do things, volunteer for things, be things in your chapter. You know, help take the role, help bring coffee or whatever it is. But you know, find ways to be appreciated because that helps you have self-esteem. It helps you to continue to give. Because just like in other support organizations, part of being appreciated is giving back. So if you know something and you see somebody that's struggling, give back, give the benefit of your expectations and what you're sharing. Hearing loss in adulthood is a little bit different because it's different with the psychological symptoms of early and late onset. Both groups can suffer a lot of emotions. Early onset, I think, is more difficult because the personality hasn't been developed, esteem hasn't developed, learning difficulties haven't been overcome. With late onset, you've already have personality and language. What you have to do now is incorporate the hearing loss into your new hearing loss identity and find ways that you can accept who you are as a valuable, unique person with hearing loss. Late deaf adults may mourn their loss, just like it said when we were talking about grief issues. You can go through periods of grief at any time. You can do it not in any same order. They can be mixed up. They can go away. They can come back. For example, how long did it take each of you to accept your hearing loss? In the beginning, you find people trying to hide their hearing aid. Oh, can I have the inside the ear? Or I can hide it under my hairdo or something like that. But when you get to acceptance, you don't care what it looks like. You care about your discrimination and being understood that you have to wear it or you're not going to have the discrimination that you need. You need your hearing loss and you need to identify not with denial, anger, isolation, and withdrawal, but go out in social situations anyway. You may find quiet areas where you can still communicate, but you're there, you're experiencing the experience. And I think there's different types of groups you can associate with. Some are louder, some aren't so loud, but find your support and find a way where you can fit in. Family members and audiologists can be your greatest help. Family members, because if they're honest, they can give you feedback. And you want to ask for feedback, you know, and trying to understand what I need to do in order to be better understood. I need to stay in the light. I need to get their attention. I need to talk directly to that person. I need not to look around. I need not to have a huge mustache and beard. All these different things are helpful. The audiologist can help you with your device to reset it, to reprogram it, to tell you what other options are out there. We talked about bargaining. I know I can't hear, but at least my health is good. Or devaluing, it could be, who cares if I can't hear? I never liked music anyway. Sal Graves. Depression, tearfulness, slurred responses, losing weight, sleep. They're all indicators that you need to do something. You need to see somebody. You need to talk with somebody. I can tell you firsthand that wearing a hearing aid for 15, 16 hours a day can be very tiring. Sometimes you can be exhausted. It's like looking at a Zoom call for 6 hours in a row. Sometimes it takes something out of you. Make sure you get your rest, get your sleep, do the things that you need to do to stay healthy. Cochlear implants, there's a lot of variation in who wears them and how satisfied they are. A lot of it depends on how long you've had your hearing loss or your deafness. Have you been a real long time with hearing loss? What is your IQ? Can you process, think quickly, fill in the blanks for context? Speech reading ability. How well can you do more? I think everybody does it. It's just a matter of how proficient you get at it. Whether you're a pessimist or an optimist, some people can be the greatest optimist in the world, but still struggle sometimes. Or you can be a pessimist before you get the implant and be a pessimist afterwards. Your expectations have to be realistic. It's not like wearing glasses where you're going to get 20/20 vision. When you get a cochlear implant, it's going to increase the volume, but you're going to have to learn how to deal with that and to discriminate electrical sounds in much the same way that you dealt with the sounds coming from your auditory nerve. There's very little literature on this relationship, but personality, especially with your surgery outcome, it's all based on how you see it and the perception you put on it. If you think, I'm going to do the best I can with this cochlear implant, and for me, that's an improvement. It's better than the hearing aid that didn't work anymore. If you see yourself as not doing well with a cochlear implant, or you see yourself as too frustrated, go back to the audiologist, go back to your doctor, and see what can be done about that. Cochlear implant surgery is a life-changing event. I mean, it's something that's going to affect your life from now and the future. And in my case, for the better. The way you respond to stress also tells you something how you'll be able to deal with it. Some people respond to stress and they fade away. They take longer naps. They sleep later. They get illnesses. They have physical complaints. And some of these are predictive of how a person may respond to a cochlear implant. Person who's rigid may look for and comment on the bad things about an implant, no matter how well it functions. It's very difficult to change the way a person views the world. That's why there's a lot of counseling before an individual gets the implant to make sure that they're ready with the expectations. Unfortunately, society still values people that have nothing wrong and nothing showing. Even though hearing loss is an invisible disability for a lot of people, a person can still be noticed if they're wearing a cochlear implant or if they're wearing a hearing aid. And for me, I say, great, I've accepted it. I want you to know I have a hearing loss. That way you can look at me when you talk. Many people with hearing loss don't like to be with people who don't understand. About 3 years ago, my chapter did a play. It was all about these vignettes of how to deal with particular hearing loss. Could be in a van talking without looking at your lips. It could be involved with having a lot of background noise in a car, all these different scenarios. And the feedback we got after that, we were in a big actual concert hall, was that it's very, very important for people, even if they don't have hearing loss, even if they're older, they want to look at the captions. They want to identify with their own discrimination, even if they don't wear a hearing loss. Some of the physical consequences, and they're listed here. When you have a hearing loss, sometimes there are periods of tiredness, headaches, stress. But there's also a lot of things that we can do with it. Social consequence, we want to avoid isolating yourself, avoid distractions. It's awful hard to identify or to avoid bluffing sometimes, because as you put things in context, our brain tries to fill in the blanks. And this is bluffing is talking about, if you really didn't understand, can you raise your hand and instead of saying something, which will probably be seen as funny, just go ahead and ask the question, I didn't understand what you said. Psychological issues, we talked about emotions, embarrassment, problems concentrating, worry, frustration, anxiety, self-criticism, low self-esteem. Most of these consequences are negative because the individual hasn't worked it through. They haven't really gone to the acceptance area of their loss. They're still dealing anger, depression, or some of the other areas that we have to do. Everyone can improve how they feel and who they are despite their hearing loss by getting the support they need, by getting the understanding they need. And the top of it line for me is the Hearing Loss Association. That's given me more than I could ever believe. And it's helped me to help so many other people in the 25 plus years that I've been a member. The world of communication is key to who you are as a person, to your personality, to your self-esteem, and to your psychology of hearing loss. I thank you for your kind attention, and I'd like to answer questions right now.
All right, Don, I stopped sharing your screen. You can go ahead and answer the questions in the Q&A.
I've got it right here. The social aspects include the cultural identity for the deaf community. The deaf community represents 1 or 2% of the entire group of people that identify. And many times, because it's so familiar to them, they don't want to leave that environment. I went through the peer mentorship course at Gallaudet University. It was a 2-year course, but we got to stay on campus for the first weekend and the last weekend. And in talking with individuals that were going through the program there, they're very proud of their culture. Many of them are very proud of their ability to communicate in the way they do, because it's a different type of language. So, but I would agree, the culture is about that. The psychological impact on children of hard of hear parents who can't hear high frequencies. In many cases, children of hard of hearing parents who can't hear, they want to be able to associate with another relative or a sibling, or perhaps a coach, a teacher, or a peer mentor. But it's definitely a challenge when you have parents who don't hear well trying to teach a child. What may be helpful in that case is to bring in individuals that have normal hearing to work with that child. Maybe even someone from your hearing loss group, or check with your audiologist, with a doctor, pediatrician that can help you do that. What's it going to take to encourage more psychologists and psychiatrists to specialize? Well, it's in the area of the beast. If you're a psychiatrist, you dispense medication and you're dealing with giving medical services to someone who has a psychiatric diagnosis in the DSM-5 or DSM-6. If you're a psychologist, most likely you can't dispense medicine, and you're working with education, you're working with testing, you're working with an educational environment. I think what we need to have more of is peer mentors, people that can specialize in all rehabilitation, people that understand hearing loss from a personal perspective, maybe by going to HLA meetings. I have a couple of people in our chapter who don't have a hearing loss, but they know other individuals that do. One of them is a teacher, and I think that we've helped that person over the years to identify and work with children. I don't think, unless the psychologist in the Veteran Administration has specialized on their own because of their own hearing loss, they're not going to get a lot of information on hearing loss. Because again, the focus right now is we have to have psychologists in the school system, not as counseling, but for education. And that's where most of the money is. You can be a counselor and psychologist where you have privileges to work with people, sometimes under supervision. But it's going to take a new discipline of audiologists with hearing specialization to really help get the ball rolling. Because Lexis is not a whole lot of support out there, unless we can help train that individual, let the psychologist know what we need, advocate for myself. Even when you see an audiologist at the VA or elsewhere, say, this is where I'm having trouble. I'm having trouble in outside the house. I'm having trouble with background noise. I need to be able to use a telephone. I'd like to understand music, all these types of things. The difficulty question, can you speak to the difficulty of wearing masks? I will give you one example. Where is it?
I got it. Just a package. It's just a package.
What I've got here, if you can see it, is a Clearview mask. And what I've done is I've given this to my care providers, to my dentist that does the work on my teeth, to the person who cleans my teeth. And I've even asked other people if they would like them, because they're becoming more popular. You can get them at Walmart's. Some people have full face plastic shields, but especially in hospitals, you really need to find, if you're being admitted to the hospital, to advocate during your registration that you can't communicate speech if they're having a mask, or you can't answer questions sometimes. At least I can't. I have not tried the Oticon cochlear implant. We have individuals with that device in our chapter, but I think today you have a choice of 3 major cochlear implant manufacturers, and it's up to your preference which one you choose. I went online and looked up each of them, looked at the pro and con, and I tried to make the best decision I could. And again, Peg, thank you for your compliment, but I think it's important for all of us to do a good job as a teacher. Every situation, every day, I'm teaching. If we're not communicating, I'm teaching. If you do this, it will be helpful. If I can see you, if you can increase your volume. I don't know about you, but I've gone to restaurants where the waitress will have a very soft voice, almost like a librarian, but softer. And it's very difficult to understand anybody in that kind of a situation. I think, to me, is it more difficult to adjust? The question is it more difficult to adjust with a hearing aid or a cochlear implant? For me, who have worn, since 1970, I've worn hearing aids. And the cochlear implant, I've had 18 months. I'm still learning to discriminate better, especially my short sounds, consonants at the beginning and at the end of a word. The sound is different. The impact for me with a cochlear implant, the first thing I had to get used to was the volume. And that took a couple of weeks practice, but I stayed at it. I wore my cochlear implant every waking moment. And I think the hearing aid gives you more of a natural speech with the digital aids that they have today. But for someone who's gone beyond that and their hearing loss is larger, definitely did the same. And Kelly wanted to know where I went to community college.
Don,
Yes.
that is all the time we have for questions today.
Okay,
I'm now going to share the Oticon video.
well, give anybody that needs my email address, you can send it to them.
Individuals have hearing needs that are as unique as their personalities. At Oticon, we have developed a full portfolio of life-changing technology built upon our brain hearing philosophy that supports the brain's natural process of making sense of sound. Oticon, life-changing technology.
Thank you so much to Don Doherty for a great presentation. And thank you, Whitney Riley, for your amazing cart services today. Don, what is your email so we can give it out to everyone? I'm sorry, I think you got cut off before.
It's just like my name, Don Doherty, 46.
All right, I will send it in the chat right now.
At
Don,
Gmail. Don Doherty 46 at gmail.com.
46.
At gmail.com.
All right, I just put it in the chat for everyone.
Thank you.
And once again, this webinar will be posted to the HLA website, so you can watch it at a future date. And please check hearingloss.org for future webinars and webinar recordings. And thank you so much for joining us today. Stay safe and have a great rest of your day.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.